gosh. Oh gosh. Did you see that? Double? Oh my gosh. It's a decent fish too on the Rapala X Prop. Stay on there. Dang, he's feisty, dude. He smoked that thing. Not quite sure how I want to grab that thing full of treble hooks. Spin him this way and get him on the back. Jeez, look at that chunky thing. Careful not to get any treble hooks in our hands here. That guy absolutely came unglued on that bait. You can tell it's been up for a little while. It's starting to get that real dark back color to them. When they get up in this sunlight, they start getting all their colors. When they're down deep, they'll be real pasty white, so you can kind of tell how long those fish have been up just based on their colors. We'll get her back. One of the big misconceptions with a topwater prop style bait is that it's really only good for target specific scenarios, but that's not the case. It's actually a very good search style bait. And the reason it works so well is that I can make long casts with it, and it allows me to keep that bait in the strike zone really well. So where those fish are just pulling up, when we talked about them being kind of lethargic, but aggressive enough that they're willing to eat a topwater, they're kind of just sitting there waiting. And a bait that makes a lot of commotion is gonna draw those fish to the bait, and then you can just let it sit there, and you can vary your retrieve and change the action of the bait. So I can give it hard pops and really blow a lot of water, or if I can see a fish trailing the bait, or if I'm around a specific piece of cover, I can just barely tap the rod tip down and just create just a little bit of commotion where I don't want to spook those fish, but just kind of attract them and maybe trigger that bite where those fish may be not sure whether or not they want to eat it. Those little just subtle twitches of the rod tip a lot of times will create just enough to trigger that bite. So carry a couple different colors, and just depending on the scenario, you know, with a dirtier water situation, I'm going to want something that's a little bit darker, maybe with a little bit more gold. And as I get into clear water, something like the yellow perch or a silver sided type of bait. So if you guys haven't tried out Rapala X Prop for a search bait, you guys need to check it out. It's a good way to catch some giant largemouth. One of the things that makes a prop bait so special as a search bait is how versatile it is. I can fish it across big giant open grass flats, or I can really fish it up against the bank and cover water that way. And the way that the bait is built, right, it's got a prop in the front, prop in the back. It allows me to create all that commotion we were talking about, but it also allows me to do a lot of different varied retrieves. So as those fish are, you know, more lethargic, it's almost like a jerk bait where I'm gonna have longer pauses, a little bit slower, and as those fish start to warm up, I'm gonna use the rod and I can actually move that bait a lot quicker, a lot more aggressive as those fish start to become more aggressive. And so I really just time it with the way that the fish are acting that day, right? If it's a real warm day, usually I can fish it a little bit faster and get away with it that way. And as far as rods, I like a little bit shorter rod, a 6'10" to 7 foot medium action rod, something that's got a good tip, but enough backbone to fight those big fish, because you will catch big ones on it if you're around them. And for line, I throw a 20-pound or a 30-pound Seaguar Smackdown braid. But with that, one thing that's really important, and I'll show you guys, is throwing a monofilament leader. So what I do is I just take a really small monofilament leader. I use a Crazy Alberto knot, so it's really smooth and it slides through the guides well if I need it to. But what that does is, you can see how that mono is a lot stiffer than the braid. So if you're to tie directly with the braid, as this bait is moving, the braid will possibly become wrapped up in the blades, where this mono, 15, 20-pound ripping monofilament from Seaguar, is going to keep that away from the blades, and it's also gonna be clear to the fish. So that's a little tip. You tie on a little piece of mono. It's gonna help with a little bit of stretch, and it's gonna keep your line out of those blades. But the braid is gonna help you cast really far. So it's a great combination. I actually do that with all my top waters, but it's really important with a prop bait where you've gotta stop and go retrieve. One of the important things to keep in mind anytime you're throwing a top water bait, especially a prop bait, is your hook set. You don't want to just jerk that rod as soon as you see that fish hit. You really want to wait until you feel that fish start to pull on the bait and load up, because what happens is a lot of times those fish, they'll actually roll on the bait to test it out before they actually eat it sometimes. And if you jerk that bait away from them and they don't have it in their mouth yet, you're gonna completely screw up the situation. You may even spook the fish. So I always wanna allow that fish to actually start to pull on my line just a little bit where it gets tight, and then I'm just gonna lean into them. I've got enough backbone in this alpha angler rod that I don't need to have a real sharp, quick hook set. I've got 3 treble hooks, that braided line, it's not gonna have any stretch, so even if they're out on a long cast, I can just kind of lean into those fish, allow the hooks to drive into the fish, and then I'm just gonna keep steady pressure on them and fight them back to the boat. So make sure that you allow that fish to suck the bait in, give a little tension, and then you're gonna lean back into them. Not with a sharp hook set, quick, smooth, but just good steady pressure.